after a breakout season last year, Leo Taveras established himself as the Rangers center fielder. But with two top prospects in the outfield chomping at his heels, is he going to keep his job as a starting outfielder for the Rangers in 2024? And some news out of Boston that could mean the end of the Rangers' hopes for a reunion with Jordan Montgomery. Talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan covering this team for 10 seasons, including all 5 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into the expectations for Leo Taveras, why he is such a valuable player, and the news coming out of Boston that could end the Rangers' hopes at bringing back Jordan Montgomery, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, there's news this morning from Jeff Passan of ESPN out of Boston's camp. Boston's starting pitcher Lucas Giolito likely has a partially torn UCL and flexor strain and could miss the 2024 season, league sources tell ESPN. Giolito, who signed a 2-year deal with Boston, may need surgery to repair the right elbow damage. Now, that is some rough news for Boston and rough news for Lucas Giolito, a guy who I thought the Rangers could have bought pretty low on this offseason, ended up getting a lot more money than I thought he would, and it made perfect sense in Boston. I still thought they needed another starting pitcher for the rotation. They had an okay rotation. I think their bullpen's pretty darn good, especially with Chris Martin having a world-beating season last year. I believe it was around a 1-ish ERA, and Kenley Jansen was solid, and their offense was a lot better than a lot of people expected. And at this point in the offseason, it feels like the Jordan Montgomery sweepstakes is a 2-team race between Boston, which is where his wife is having her residency, so obviously would be nice to go back to the Northeast where he was with the Yankees and was close to his wife, or he's coming back to Texas where he just won a championship and clearly is a fit here, and clearly the Rangers would really, really like him to come back. Now, this felt like exactly what Scott Boras was holding out for. Not that he was hoping for any injuries, but at this point, with the 2 big pitchers on the market left being Jordan Montgomery and Blake Snell, both Boras clients, the hope there was that he would get some kind of extra leverage over some team that is hoping to compete, which I think is the Boston Red Sox this year. That's what they're saying, at least. They're saying they want to be competitive, but now they might be without one of the guys in the middle of the rotation, one of the surest options to, munch away some innings and just be a solid part of that rotation. I mean, one of the things that I'm sure the Red Sox love and that I was excited about Giolito, if the Rangers were to sign him, is that he has been very healthy, very consistent, made most of his starts the last 3 years. And this just goes to show you that pitchers are the most fragile beings on the baseball diamond. It's not their fault. Throwing a baseball like that many times, it's just, there's so many different things that can go wrong with the elbow, with the shoulder, with everything of this process, that even the guys who you bet on to be very, very durable sometimes aren't that. I mean, Max Scherzer was the peak of durability for the first, 15, 16 years of his career. And the last couple of years, he's finally starting to be ravaged by Father Time. Had an injury last year that we thought was going to end his season. Ended up seeing him again, the ALCS and at the World Series. And, those 6 or 9 innings, however many innings he actually threw in the postseason, helped the Rangers enough to get that championship, but then had herniated disc surgery. He's going to be out till June. The Rangers they signed Tyler Mahle, who's coming off Tommy John surgery. Their $185 million ace that they signed pitched 6 games for them last year and will miss most of this year as well. It's just the gamble you take with pitchers. But now, the other team, one of the teams very heavily linked to Jordan Montgomery, has some incentivized leverage The Boston Red Sox have lost leverage over Jordan Montgomery, saying, we don't really need you. We're going to compete with the guys we have in our rotation. But they're still a team that has plenty of room to add to their payroll this year. Right now, they have the 12th highest payroll. The Boston Red Sox, a team that has been one of the better run teams the last 20 years, has the most championships, I believe, tied for the most championships since the year 2000 of any team in Major League Baseball. I mean, they broke the curse of the Bambino, and then they just went nuts, and then they went cheap the last couple of years. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense, and for a team that did sign one of their stars to a long-term deal, they lost Xander Bogaerts and really got blown out of the water with the offer on Xander Bogaerts from the San Diego Padres. They signed Rafael Devers to that $300 million deal and said, okay, we're going to compete. And so Jordan Montgomery made sense as a fit there. He made sense as a fit on most any roster. And for a team that's in an incredibly difficult division, now Scott Boras can go to them and say, hey, are you really sure about your being competitive this year? Or it might go the other way, and it might force the Rangers to finally up their offer to Jordan Montgomery. I think, okay, maybe they thought they could wait out Boras at this point. I mean, we're 23 days away from opening day. And maybe the Rangers thought, okay, eventually we will wait out Boras. Look at what happened with Matt Chapman. Look at what happened with Cody Bellinger. Those guys settled for much smaller deals with some opt-outs, with some flexibility, because so many teams are in an uncertain place with the TV revenue and or whatever else their finances are in uncertain places about, which is what the Rangers are claiming as well, and where they likely are. And they thought, okay, we can wait out Scott Boras on a Jordan Montgomery signing, hope that none of our guys get hurt in spring training, because if this were the Rangers, this is their number 3 starter, the Phillies, maybe the number 2 starter even. This would be like, I'd say Dane Dunning or maybe Andrew Heaney or, God forbid, John Gray. Maybe it's the equivalent of a John Gray. If John Gray was missing the season, then the Rangers would have to empty their pocketbooks for whatever Scott Boras was asking with Jordan Montgomery. Thankfully, that's not the case where the Rangers are right now, but maybe seeing that the Boston Red Sox might be a little bit more desperate, the team that is most heavily linked to Jordan Montgomery. According to Bob Nightingale of USA Today, there have been several more teams that have reached out to Scott Boras in the last couple of weeks since spring training started about Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery. Unfortunately, he didn't name any names, which isn't super helpful in reporting. Just feels like more, smoke by Boras to get his clients more leverage. But at this point, it feels likely that other teams are like, okay, well, if these guys are still out there, we didn't really think that we were going to add these guys. It could kind of be like a Nathan Eovaldi situation with the Rangers last year. I mean, at Christmas last year, the Rangers had already added, 3, 4, 5 starting pitchers maybe from that point in the offseason. They had Jake Odorizzi, brought back Martin Perez, signed Jacob deGrom. They had signed Andrew Heaney at that point. And then they added Nate Eovaldi as a 5th starting pitcher just during the offseason. And so maybe a team that doesn't really need a whole lot of help in their rotation, maybe the Baltimore Orioles finally open up that checkbook. I mean, they have a question mark about their number 2 starter in Kyle Bradish. The industry, is expecting him to have Tommy John surgery, so maybe that could get them in on the Jordan Montgomery sweepstakes. I think they were one of the teams that was looking at trading for him at the deadline, but the Rangers seem to offer a better package to the St. Louis Cardinals. Seems like that is a very good trade package looking back, but hey, it vaulted the Rangers over the Orioles, and I don't know why that team that is so low in payroll and has room in their rotation. Everybody in Major League Baseball has room in their rotation for Jordan Montgomery, and even though it might be a little bit of an overpay, sometimes that's what you got to do for reliable starting pitching. I've been saying all offseason that I want the Rangers to go ahead and do that. Maybe getting the Boston Red Sox, maybe they'll up their offer, and Scott Boras will come back to the Rangers and say, hey, Boston upped their offer. This is your last chance to get this guy and bring him back. I think that Jordan Montgomery wants to be with the Rangers. The Rangers definitely want him here. And I think that this might be something that finally forces one of these teams to budge. They've been waiting for some kind of leverage play, some kind of anything to affect one of the main teams that is a suitor for Jordan Montgomery. This might end up being what gets the deal done, or gets somebody to move, because Jordan Montgomery is too good a pitcher to still be out there. Same thing with Blake Snell. I'll talk about that later on in the week, why I think a shorter-term deal, I might come around on a shorter-term deal for signing Blake Snell. But this is a guy who needs to be back on the Rangers, has needed to be back on the Rangers a long, long time. It can't go on much longer for him to be ready for opening day. We're just over 3 weeks away from opening day. These guys need to get their reps in. They need to get some spring training outings in so they can be fully healthy, fully ready for the start of the season. Now, we'll see how that works out, but I think this is an important development for the Rangers specifically, and might finally get Jordan Montgomery back in a Rangers uniform and get him that lifetime of free barbecue that one restaurant offered Jordan Montgomery. That might end up being the sweetener to bring our large lefty son back home to Texas. Coming up, we're going to talk about Leody Taveras, a little bit about a great start from Cody Bradford, what's expected from him, and how Leody can still be the starting center fielder for the Rangers at the end of this regular season. Right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by our new sponsor, PrizePicks. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's the tournament season or a fight or a playoff home court, there is no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Now, there's all kinds of different ways you can get in on the action. You just pick more or less on your favorite players' stats, or just random players that you feel pretty good about their stats. Right now, you could go over or under with 24.5 points from Jason Tatum, over under 28.5 points from Nikola Jokic, over under 26.5 points from Steph Curry, and over under 18.5 points from Victor Wembanyama. I'd definitely take that over 18.5 points from Wemby. That feels like a pretty solid bet. It is the easiest app to use. It is such a great app. It is so much fun. Just pick all these little over-unders. No commitment of the full season long. Just every day, get in on the action, what you feel good about that given night. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a deposit match up to $100. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's just that easy. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I'll be back and talking about Adolis Garcia, why him changing his approach unlocked such a new version of himself, and why this is the El Bombi that is here to stay. Now, Leody Taveras is a very good baseball player. That might be a controversial statement among a lot of Rangers fans, but this guy is good. This is a good homegrown player playing center field, doing it well, and is one of the best number 9 hitters in the entirety of Major League Baseball. Last year, played 143 games with the Rangers, 31 doubles, 14 home runs, a .733 OPS, an OPS plus of 97, so just 3% worse than the average Major League hitter, and a 2.6 Baseball Reference WAR season. That is a good player. It is a good young player, and he is still getting so much better. That was his age 24 season. It feels like he's been around for a long time, mainly because this is what his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th Major League spring training. 2016 was the first time that he was in Major League spring training, but this is going to be probably just the third time that he has more than 10 games under his belt in spring training. Even last year, he only played in 5 games because of the injury, but last year, it took a little time for him to get back up to speed. Thankfully, that injury ended up being a blessing in disguise, letting Travis Jankowski make the roster. And, we all know how that worked out pretty well after that point. But Leody Taveras is the Rangers center fielder. This is not something that is in question. I thought it might be in question whether he was going to play center field, whether he was going to play left field. But Bruce Bochy has said time and time again this spring that, nope, Leody is our center fielder. That's what's happening. Evan Carter's going to be in left or right. Wyatt Langford's going to be in left or right or DHing. And Adolis Garcia is going to be playing in right field or DHing at this point. So this is what it is. This is where the Rangers are. And having A young, talented, switch hitting guy who hits for power, guy who hits or who has speed, guy who fields very, very well. A player like Leody Taveras, because there was so much promise on him as a prospect, I feel like that really hangs over his head in a big, big way, and sometimes creates unfair expectations for Leody Taveras. Now, one of the things that I talked about that made Evan Carter so great and why I was so high on him is because the things that Evan Carter does well, getting on base, being fast, having a good glove, those things don't slump. That is the player who has a high, high floor. And Leody Taveras, he doesn't have Evan Carter's walk ability. If he did, then I think that might make him too powerful. But he does have elite speed. He has an elite arm, and he has pretty good instincts in the field. Now, I feel like he gets unfairly penalized because so many times, or so unfairly thought of as a bad defender, but overall, he has been a very, very solid defender for his major league career. Last year, a plus 1.9 defense overall from Fangraphs in 2021, a plus 5.8 defense overall. Last year, a 2.3 Fangraphs WAR player, projects to be about that this year, according to Fangraphs. They think he's going to play in fewer games this year, but hit the same number of home runs. They think he's going to be about a league average hitter, and that's the expectation for Leody Taveras. The expectations on this guy are not sky high. They are not insanely high. They are not astronomical. I think he might put a little bit too much pressure on himself because he looks over to his right when he's standing in the outfield and sees, oh, there's Evan Carter. There's this 21-year-old kid who just went nuclear in the postseason, and then he'll see Wyatt Langford over there and think, okay, well, how am I going to stay in here? Well, his base running and his defense. Those things are incredibly valuable for a player, especially for when you're a center fielder. That defense is so valuable and so often overlooked. Just having a 2.5 baseball reference WAR season or better from a homegrown player, a truly homegrown player, that's not something the Rangers have done a whole lot these last couple years. Since 2010, there have been only 7 players that have had a 2.5 WAR season. Now that's homegrown players from the Rangers since 2010. That's 14 seasons. That's one every other season. That's not something that happens very often. Those players are Leody Taveras, Joey Gallo, IKF, Rougned Odor, Leonys Martin, Craig Gentry, Ian Kinsler, and Michael Young. I think that's 8 because I was not including Leody in this. But how many of those guys were pre-arbitration eligible? One of the things that I talked about this team being so good, why they're set up so well for the long term, is because not only do they have these good hitters, and so many of them, but a lot of them are pre-arbitration. Now, Leody Taveras is no longer pre-arbitration. He's making, I believe, around $3 million this year. But he was pre-arb last year, a 2.5 WAR player. How many homegrown pre-arb 2.5 WAR players the Rangers had since 2010? Well, there's been Leody, who's done it once. Joey Gallo did it twice. Rugi did it once. And the other two are Leonys Martin and Craig Gentry. So not a whole lot of guys that are putting up that kind of numbers while being a pre-arb guy. I think the Rangers will have several guys that end up doing that this year. Josh Young just missed the cut. He was at 2.3 baseball reference WAR, so just barely outside of that range. I think Josh Young is probably going to have at least a 2.5 WAR baseball reference WAR season this year. I think we're probably going to see that from Evan Carter. And depending on when Wyatt Langford comes up, how much defense he plays, how much time in the outfield, I think we're going to see that from Wyatt Langford as well. I'm of the mind that Langford's going to start on opening day. But a lot of that depends on him, what the Rangers do if they sign a DH, which I don't think they will or should. And a lot of it depends on Leody Taveras. Now in spring training, it has not been the easiest run for Leody. He's played in 7 games, 13 at-bats, hitting below 100, with on base of 278, so the walks are pretty decent. 4 walks and 13 at-bats, so 17 plate appearances there. Not a horrible development there. Getting a lot of plate appearances as a right-handed hitter, something he didn't do as well last year. But this is a guy that is a well-rounded player, and if this is the 9th best hitter in your lineup, the 9th best position player you have, and he's a 2.5 WAR player, that is incredibly valuable. That is incredibly rare, and Leody Taveras is one of the biggest reasons why this lineup was so dangerous, so deadly, so unbeatable last year at times. Because if a guy like this, who's maybe an average hitter, an average big league hitter, that's still a pretty good player, plus all the defense that he brings in center field, plus all the base running that he brings, if he's getting on base ahead of your leadoff guys, ahead of Marcus Semien, ahead of Corey Seager, those guys are going to drive him in. And with his base running, he can get into scoring position pretty easily for those guys. And if that's the 9th best player on your team, that puts you in such an incredibly great position. Coming up, we're talking about what he did so well last year, what he needs to do to continue that, and what he needs to improve on this year in 2024. Right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You make all kinds of bets, like the Rangers over-under on wins is set at 88.5 right now. Before it was 89.5, but at 88.5, I feel much more tempted to smash that over. I think this Ranger team is going to be really good during the regular season. There's a lot of variance, and so if you're believing in the health of the Rangers, I think that is a great bet to make. There's also bets on Corey Seager as the 3rd favorite for AL MVP, and the Rangers have 2 rookies in the top 3 of AL Rookie of the Year honors in Evan Carter at number 1 and Wyatt Langford at number 2. So go check out all the bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On Thursday, I'll be back and talking with a member of Baseball Prospectus's team about their Rangers season preview, and then predicting the Rangers to have just 84 wins. We're talking about all that on Thursday's show. Now let's get back to Leody Taveras, a very good baseball player. And the thing that I think we learned about Leody Taveras last year that we kind of learned the year before in 2022 is that Mr. Leody Taveras is a very, very, very streaky player offensively. Now, like I said, that defense doesn't slump, him being a pretty darn good defender in center field. There are some misplays that he has every once in a while, but overall, generally, he is a pretty darn good fielder. His fielding run value last year, according to Baseball Savant, was in the top 16% of baseball. Base running value, top 8% of baseball. So that is a very good overall player. But offensively, we saw it very much in the first half versus the second half this past year in 2023, and even more egregiously in 2022. This year in the first half, he had an 812 OPS, 10 of his 14 home runs in 296 plate appearances, and in the second half, an OPS nearly 100 and actually exactly 170 points lower at 642. Now, his best months were categorized by clearly in the month of May. The guy was a hitting machine. Hit 368 with an on base just 1 point shy of 420 and slugged over 500, a 935 OPS in that month of May. Came back at the end, or at the middle of April, played in 16 games in the month of April and was abysmal. He's still coming back from that oblique injury, and there were a lot of questions of, okay, well, I mean, Evan Carter spent about like 5 minutes in Double-A, but should we call him up and have him replace Leody? I don't know. We're going to give Leody a little bit of time, and we'll see if he can figure it out. And then the month of May happened, and Leody quieted all of those doubts while Evan Carter was going through a bit of a slump after his power got sapped after getting hit in the arm by a pitch. Not the best middle months for Evan Carter, and a very good middle 2 months of the season in May and June from Leody Taveras. Leody also hit 7 home runs in the month of June, slashed a pretty darn good 266, 303, 521, and 824 OPS, the second best month of his season. But then it got rough in July, and it really, really got rough in the month of August, when the Raiders offense was just not doing much of anything in August, and they needed some kind of boost from anybody. I mean, Mitch Garver and Corey Seager were going nuts in August. But August was the month of bad offensive Leody Taveras, hitting below 200. This last line of 194, 225, 333. Just 1 home run in that entire month. 4 walks to 26 strikeouts. There was a lot of thought of, okay, now it's time for Evan Carter. Maybe it's time for just somebody else in center field, because this is not sustainable. Even from your number 9 hitter, a guy with a 558 OPS for a month, that's not great. But the thing about Leote that he did last year that he didn't do the year prior is that eventually he pulled himself out of that slump. That was something that we didn't see in 2022, and one of the big questions was, is he a guy who just is great in the first half and then falls off a cliff and can't get himself out of that kind of tailspin? It was kind of a 2-month tailspin, because in the month of July, he wasn't that much better either. A 625 OPS in that month, nearly 200 points lower than the month of June. But hey, in September and October, he turned himself around, hit just 1 point shy of 300 for that month, 2 home runs, but a 793 OPS, just a little bit shy of 800. That's the Leo Taveras that the Rangers were hoping for. That's the Leo Taveras they saw a little bit of in the playoffs, and that's why he was able to keep that starting role. I mean, if he had been much worse than that, it would have been, really tough to watch. But overall in the playoffs, that bat did not play up, especially in the World Series. I mean, offensively in the World Series, it was rough. It was incredibly rough for Leo Taveras. I mean, 0 for 16. Did have 3 walks, but a 151 OPS is not great. It's much better in the ALCS. I mean, defensively, he had that home run robbery of Jordan Alvarez. I believe that was in Game 5. Maybe that was Game 4. But great defense all around there. And even hit a home run off of Justin Verlander in the ALCS. That's what kind of a big-time player Leo Taveras can be. Hit 333 in that wild card series, an on-base of 385 in the ALDS, an 801 OPS in 7 games of the ALCS. That was solid, but again, we saw it from series to series. Leo Taveras is a very streaky player. And that's something you can deal with your number 9 hitter. But he's got to have those hot streaks to kind of balance out the long cold streaks. One of the things that differentiates, in my mind, the best players in Major League Baseball from the guys that are just okay, average, middle-of-the-road, everyday starters is that Corey Seager does not have prolonged months where he sucks. Everybody in Major League Baseball will have at least a couple weeks where they're in a stinker. They're in a cold spot. They are just not doing well, either at the plate or on the mound. That's just what happens. It's the nature of a 162-game season. There are very few players. One of the things that was most impressive about Ronald Acuna Jr. for me last year is that he didn't have a single month with an OPS below 900. I think he might have had one at 875 or something, but every single month, Acuna was just incredible until the playoffs. But still, these guys who are pretty good starting caliber players, like Leo Taveras, a pretty good everyday starter, first division starter, I'd say, he will have a couple month stretch where he is just in a really, really rough way. He'll also have balanced it out with those prolonged stretches of being fantastic. Now, if he can cut down on some of those prolonged bad stretches, maybe instead of having a 2-month bad stretch, have a 1-month bad stretch, just kind of make those hot streaks last a little bit longer and those cold streaks last a little bit shorter. That is the mark of a great player. But the things that are expected from Leo Taveras this next year, there are basically 3 things that the Rangers want him to do: play great defense, work solid at bats, and be a menace on the base paths. That's it. The results aren't as much of a concern from your number 9 hitter, but playing consistent defense, he's still got that absolute cannon for an arm out there in center field, which is a very fun thing to have at a center fielder. I loved watching Leonys Martin play center field defense, and I love watching Leote play center field defense, not only because he'll make those spectacular plays of robbing home runs, but that arm is a deterrent very much from hitters taking the extra bases, which makes your pitchers better, which makes your team overall a lot better. I think he's going to be a little bit more aggressive on the base path this year. We saw him have 14 stolen bases this past year. I think we could see that number bump up just a little bit in the regular season. I think the Rangers overall will be a little bit more aggressive. And the success rate was pretty solid. In 2022, he stole 11 bases, got caught stealing 5 times. This past year, he had 14 stolen bases, just got caught stealing 4 times. I want to see that number bumped up just a little bit, hoping the on-base goes up into if you can get it up into the 320 range from your 9-hole hitter, that would be great. Last year was at 312, which was okay, solid. 14 home runs, 14 stolen bases, pretty solid, especially when you pile that in with 31 doubles. This is a solid player, and there is not a whole lot of expectation on Leody Taveras. Now, I know for years and years and years he was brought up as, this is one of the Rangers' top prospects. There was a lot thought of him basically from the age of 16. It took him a whole 5 years. He was 21 when he made his big league debut back in 2020, and it felt like, okay, we've been hearing about this guy for absolutely forever. There is like prospect fatigue on a 21-year-old making his big league debut. I think we have to shed those prior expectations. Don't think about the Leody Taveras that was promised. Think about the Leody Taveras that's here today. That's a good player. That's a valuable player. And there is no need to just ship him off for whatever deal. Like, looking at that Corbin Burnes trade and thinking, well, what if the Rangers just traded Leody Taveras and just put him in that deal and got an ace at the top of their rotation to kind of help them out and not have to worry about Jordan Montgomery and not have to worry too much about how healthy these older pitchers are when they get off the IL at some point, various points this season. Leody Taveras, 3 years of club control of Leody Taveras is worth more than 1 year of Corbin Burnes. This is a darn good player. This is a hard thing to do, is to home grow these players. The Rangers are about to do it quite a bit to make it look more common, but it is not. It is not something they have done well over the course of the last couple years. And I think we need to appreciate who Leody Taveras is, the kind of player that he can be, and not put unfair expectations on this guy. If he ends up with a 20-homer season this year and a 20-steal season, I think that would be absolutely phenomenal outcome. Maybe he doesn't have a second-half crater like he did last year, but hey, we saw him pull himself out of it, and maybe we could see a little bit more from him in the playoffs this next year than we saw overall in 2023. But it didn't matter because this offense is so stinking deep, so stinking talented, that if this guy, a 2.6 baseball reference for player, is the guy you think of as your 9th best position player, it goes to show you how incredibly good, how incredibly talented, and how incredibly deep this formidable Texas Rangers offense is. And my God, it just keeps getting better. But appreciate Leody Taveras for who he is, not who he was expected to be, because who he is a darn good center fielder. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.